Sometimes it happens that all power is in the hands of one person who uses it to their advantage. That's how dictatorship begins. Eliminating the competitors and silencing those dissatisfied, dictators destroy the economy, kill opponents, and wage wars. Their criminal activity can last decades. Today, we are going to talk about 5 of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century. But we didn't include those who are world famous for their crimes. We are going to tell you about the less known, but no less terrible criminals. If you like our videos about history, subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Pol Pot was the leader of the Communist Party of Cambodia since the 1960s. The region was engulfed in flames during the Second Indochina War. It was a combination of civil wars and the Vietnam War, in which the US Army got engaged. For many years, the Communists fought against the pro-American regime. Eventually, in 1975, Pol Pot seized power. The Khmer Rouge, a special movement within the Communist Party, began to rule the country, and Pol Pot was their leader. When the Communists won, people of Cambodia expected at least peace and a slightly better life. But they didn't know that Pol Pot had his own image of a perfect society. Within a few days, all residents of Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, were evicted to villages. There were over 2 million people. The thing is that the Khmer Rouge considered cities to be the centers of sins and counter-revolution that had to be destroyed. According to them, agriculture was the only thing that could help in creating communism. Later, people were evicted from other cities. Obviously, it was no ordinary evacuation. People had to walk for miles and miles at gunpoint. Thousands of people starved to death. The economy collapsed due to the desolation of the cities. The entire population was divided into 3 groups: the old villagers, the new villagers, and the reactionary intelligentsia. The latter included people such as priests, artists, and civil servants. And Pol Pot wanted to destroy them for good. The evacuation was followed by mass repression. People could be arrested even for wearing glasses. The Khmer Rouge executed thousands of people. Hundreds more died of starvation. In a few years, the regime took the lives of 2 million Cambodians, which constitutes a third of the country's population. The dictator was overthrown, and a new war against Vietnam began. He disappeared into the woods and led the resistance for many years. Pol Pot died in 1998 without ever being convicted of his crimes. Pol Pot's contemporary, the Ugandan warlord Idi Amin, initiated one of the most violent regimes in history. Once in power, he ousted all non-black people and nationalized their property. Although Amin had no idea about the rules of economics, he tried to manage it on his own. As a result, Uganda was on the verge of famine and humanitarian catastrophe. Corruption and embezzlement reached incredible proportions. While the population was starving to death, the dictator stank of wealth. Amin was one of the most eccentric rulers in world history. For example, he assumed the titles of the Conqueror of the British Empire and King of Scotland. Once, he waged a war against the United States, but immediately ended it and declared himself the winner. Despite being a weirdo, Amin was an incredibly cruel and bloodthirsty tyrant. As soon as he took over the country, he created death squads that wiped out his competitors. Later, they went on killing the opposition. Amin could not stand the tribes that inhabited Uganda and destroyed tens of thousands of them. In total, up to 500,000 people were killed during his reign. Amin shot several thousands personally. Moreover, he admitted to being a cannibal. Amin took to the world stage and tried to enlist the support of the United States, Great Britain, and the USSR. However, in 1978, Uganda waged a war against Tanzania and lost its international support. The army was defeated, so the dictator had to flee the country. Although he was often threatened, he lived until 2003 and died of high blood pressure. Many dictators seize power promising their people a better future, and some of them still remain rather controversial personalities. If you want to out-argue those who think it's not that simple, check out our course on history. The link is in the bio. Saddam Hussein was a youth activist of the Ba'ath Party, an influential movement popular in the Middle East. At the heart of its ideology was the desire to unite all Arabs into one state. Saddam soon became one of the leaders of the party. In 1968, the Ba'ath Party staged a coup and came to power. Hussein became the second man in Iraq, but he was the one who ruled the country. Iraq received a lot of money from selling oil, and Hussein used the money to carry out massive reforms. He fought against illiteracy and poverty. At the same time, he persecuted the unwanted and confronted the Iraqi Kurds who lived in an autonomous region within Iraq. Saddam's secret police imprisoned, tortured, and executed thousands of opposition members. Soon, the dictator got rid of all opponents, and all the power was in his hands. As president of Iraq, he waged a splendid little war against Iran, where the Islamic Revolution took place in 1979. But he failed to quickly defeat the enemies. The conflict lasted 8 years. At the same time, the country was in the grip of another war against the Kurds. During the Anfal campaign, more than 100,000 people were killed, including those killed by chemical weapons. The war between Iraq and Iran took millions of lives and destroyed the economies of both countries. At the time, it was the largest military conflict since World War II. But the defeat didn't stop Saddam. As soon as the war ended, the Iraqi army invaded Kuwait, a small neighboring country with huge oil reserves. It was Saddam's plan to improve the economy after losing the war. The UN approved the international military campaign to liberate Kuwait. As a result, the Iraqi economy was completely destroyed, and Iraq turned into one of the poorest countries in the world. To consolidate his power, Saddam began to suppress the protests with the army. During his reign, he created a cult of personality, erected many monuments to himself, and forced school children to praise the great leader. The corruption was so staggering that Saddam became one of the richest men in the world, along with the King of Saudi Arabia. Hussein was overthrown in 2003 when the US invaded Iraq. Saddam Hussein was accused of crimes against humanity, genocide of the Kurds, using the army against the protesters, and waging wars. For this, he was sentenced to death by the Supreme Court of Iraq. However, even the dictator's death didn't bring peace to Iraq. Francisco Franco was one of the most ruthless European dictators. He ruled Spain for almost 40 years with an iron fist. Having seized power after the Civil War, Franco tried to purge the country of any possible resistance. He used the secret police, extrajudicial execution, labor and concentration camps. Franco ruined the lives of up to 200,000 Spanish people. In addition to political activists, the Basques and Catalans also suffered from the regime. Franco wanted to suppress their nationalistic ideas at any cost. In the 1950s, the regime softened a little and the dictator eased up. But it didn't stop the hunt for the opposition. The only difference was that they were not killed, but imprisoned for a long time. Any non-governmental political organizations were banned, censorship was total, protests and rallies were brutally suppressed by the police. At the same time, the decades of Franco's rule turned Spain from one of the poorest European countries into a prosperous one. The standard of living increased significantly, but it cannot justify dictatorship and repression. In 1975, Franco died of illnesses. He hoped that his successor, the future King of Spain, Juan Carlos I, would continue his work. Instead, the king launched a series of political reforms and turned the country into a democracy. Mobutu Sese Seko, the former president of the Congo, can hardly be called one of the most violent or bloodthirsty dictators in history, although he had a lot of blood on his hands. But he is a textbook example of where dictatorship can lead. After getting rid of the opponents and becoming the sole ruler, Mobutu began to rule like a typical African dictator, ambitiously. He disliked the communists and suppressed them by any means, which made him an ally of the United States in Africa. The US could forgive everything for his fight against the leftists. Mobutu created a cult of personality and was cruel to the opposition. He even ordered the shooting of protesters. But most importantly, he led such a weak and inept economic policy that the Congo soon found itself in a terrible position. During his reign, the Congo became the poorest country on earth. At the same time, Mobutu, his friends and family enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. While the Congolese were starving to death, Mobutu traveled to Paris to do some shopping. Over the years, he stole up to $15 billion from the budget and became one of the richest people in the world. After the shooting of student demonstrators in the early 1990s, Mobutu lost the support of Western countries and his power weakened. The Congo was dragged into the war against Rwanda and Uganda, which resulted in Mobutu's overthrow. After the exile, he died of a serious illness, but the Congo was never able to overcome the catastrophe the dictator dragged it into. World history knows more dictators. The 20th century witnessed many cruel and bloodthirsty rulers who destroyed many lives and entire countries. But these examples clearly show that unlimited power is dangerous. If you want to out-argue others in history debates, check out our courses on history. The link is in the bio.